Okay, all right, now I'm recording. Sorry about that for all those at-home students. So if you're at home, you do need to pick up some paints, brushes, and some papers from me and other materials. So you got to be in contact with me when you can pick them up, and you can either come in before or after school to the class, which would be the most convenient for me, or you can come in to the main office and pick up stuff. That's fine too. Not as convenient for me. And for those people who are at home, you probably don't know, but I do have a broken ankle, so I'd appreciate it if you came to the classroom, make it a lot easier on me. Okay. All right, I have 8 squares. You know, I use the ruler. You don't have to. You get it somewhat clean. It doesn't need to be perfect. We can always clean this up later. Big thing to learn is just always keep your end of your pencil very loose so you don't damage the watercolor paper. Don't draw it too dark or hard. And we're going to be doing 8 different techniques. There are 10 techniques that we can learn, but 2 of them we're going to let you guys decide for yourself out of those, the leftover 4, which 2 you want to use to put in these 2 sections. All right. And if you're at my point, if you've already eyeballed all your stuff, all I ask is for someone to give me a color suggestion. What would you like to paint? What color would you like to paint first? Purple. All right, it's purple. What I want you to do is very carefully, maybe with your round brush, we'll start with maybe the round brush, put maybe 1 or 2 dots of water in the purple. Not too much, just so like 1 or 2 dots. Should be plenty. All right, and what we're going to be doing while we're letting the water kind of soak into the color is we're going to learn some techniques. So each box will be a different technique of how to paint watercolors. And then what we're going to do is, the best we can, we're going to go through most of these through class. Though class is about 15 minutes shorter every day than we normally have, if not 45 minutes at some times. So we have significantly less time, so I'm going to kind of cut back on some of the lessons. We're going to try and get as many as we can in this term as we can, and we're just going to base our lesson on some of these techniques that we're going to learn. As far as watercolor goes, it's really important to learn that watercolor is really about you judging the amount of water and the amount of color that you have. There's only 2 parts to it, water and color. And how much of one, how little of the other you have will drastically change the technique you can use and what you can do. Is everyone have their drawings pretty much done? Are we ready to paint? Anybody still drawing? I don't want to go ahead. Okay, we're good? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use our flat one first. All right, I am going to, as quickly as possible in my water here, dip my brush in there, and then I'm going to scrape it on the edge so that it's just barely wet, just as little as possible. All right, and what I'm going to do is in my purple, that I have a little bit of drops of water in there, I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to do what's called loading my brush. I'm putting color into my brush. Now, you aren't in elementary anymore. I hope that you don't just shove your brush in there and scrub it around. Make sure you're very gentle with it, and we're going to pick up as much color as we possibly can. Now, as you guys are doing this, what does your brush feel like in the color? Yeah, sticky. You want that stickiness. If you are not feeling sticky, it's too wet, okay? Too much water in the paint. We want it kind of dryish, sticky-ish. All right, and then you guys can see on the screen how much purple I have now in my brush, right? And what I'm going to do on this first one is on 1/2 of it, I'm just going to, oh, well, look at that. That is too dry. So what I have to do is very carefully, this is something you guys might have to do, very carefully just real quick drop into my water, and then once again load up my brush. And this one maybe I'm not going to be as sticky. I'll keep it just a touch bit wet. Let's see if it works. Okay, a little bit better. and this is something that as we work on things, you get to know which level of water you need to create this technique. Now this technique is called a dry brush. Now that seems kind of weird because we've just been putting water into here, right? Well, it's drier than any other technique that you'll use today. So that's why they call it dry brush. Let's try it again. Ooh, there we go. All right. Let me see if I can zoom in on here. So what do you guys notice? Here, let's see if this will focus. Just give me a second. Okay, what do you guys notice about what's happening here? What's happening with the paint? What's it look like? Yeah, it's going to have a dryish feel. You're going to see streaks. You're going to see texture. Okay, and that's the key thing for a dry brush. Now, I'm going to do the same thing for my round. It still has a little bit of water in here, it looks like. I don't know about you guys, but I'm just going to put it in here. And the reason why we're doing a flat and a round is to see the difference between a dry brush with a flat and a dry brush with a round. Now, I will, in just a minute, show you how not to get a dry brush. And if you've done that, then we'll see if we can get it corrected in the margins. Okay. All right. All right, and as I've done my round, you will notice that it is very textural in here, especially at the end of the brush. Now this is a little bit wet, and if you happen to have a little bit wet, you can always just kind of dab off some onto the paper towel. All right, and then we're getting a little bit more round. And so you can see a little bit more of that texture. If you notice, this watercolor paper is very textural. It's very heavy. It's meant to take a lot of water, and the texture can be really good. Now, there's a lot of different techniques, or I mean, not techniques, excuse me. There's a lot of different reasons why you might use a dry brush. And in fact, we'll go over some in our first lesson, because our first lesson is going to be dry brush. All right, so right now, let's review our water to color ratio. All right, which one's high and which one's low?
High color, low water.
Okay, high color, low water. So if we have high color, just using pure simple logic, we should have a bright color, right? Is this a pretty intense color? Yeah, pretty intense. I mean, it's dark, but it's pretty intense. So let's flip the script. I'm just going to use my round since I have it. I have a lot of purple in here, right? So all I'm going to do is stick this into my water, shake it around a little bit. Okay. And then I'm just going to paint about half of this. All right, and look what happened. Does this look the same as the dry brush? And what has changed, though? Yeah, there's more water. So a couple things will happen when you have more water. Okay, first of all, is there any texture happening in the brush strokes? In fact, can you see any brush strokes in here? Okay, yeah, you don't see any texture really from the brush strokes. You don't see any brush strokes, period. Okay, what about the color? What does the color look like? How is it different?
Lighter.
Yeah, it's going to be lighter. Now, let me ask you this. This is a trick question here. Let's see how smart you guys are. Okay, if I were to paint a transparent, let me rinse out my brush real good and get a new color. If I were to paint this red right here transparently with lots of water, what color am I going to get? Ah, very good. Now let me ask you this. That's really light. How do you get pink though? How do you make pink though in real life? Is it just red?
Red and white.
Red and white. Okay, so let's start thinking here. This is the tricky part. Okay, where does the white come from? A paper, yeah. Now, the reason why is because what color is water? Yeah, it's clear, so it separates the particle of color that we have activated over here. All right, so if I take my flat and I just dump it in the water again, you know, I could just paint the same thing here. It just, the different brush will just paint it slightly different. That's why we use those. And if you notice here, this is a little bit more color than this one, but it's still pretty transparent, and that's what this is called, transparent wash. So before I go any further, I'm going to label these because I forgot to do that earlier. So this one is my dry brush, and this one's my transparent wash. Okay, so a wash typically means lots of water, okay? And, well, not lots, but water. And something without a lot of water is usually just a dry brush, period. There's only one technique without much water. Okay, now before we go on, okay, I'm going to take my red that I put some water into, and I do recommend, at least at this point, to put a little bit of water into each of these that we're going to use today. We might not use all of them for all I know. We'll see how it goes. Okay, now this doesn't make it easy to transport home, and at the end of the day, if you ever need to transport it home, which we probably won't today, you can just typically we'll have a place for you to store all your paints and stuff, but if you ever need to take home, you just dry it out with your paper towel and take it home. Or you can carry it in your hand. It's the end of school until it dries out. It just takes an hour or two. Okay, we're going to just take our red that we have, and we're going to go to the very last square, and we do it at the end because we want this red to be dry. Now on here, I don't want it necessarily transparent, and I don't want it dry brush. I kind of want it in between. So what does our water and color ratio probably want to eyeball it to be? Roughly equal. Okay. And I'm just going to paint it real quick here. It's going to be a little bit more on the transparent side, and if it is, then what do we need to do to get it a little less transparent? A little bit more color. I'll just dab some more into here. Now, I don't need it to be like super smooth or anything. We actually do that on the next thing. But, you know, just paint some area here, and if there's some transparent spots, that's fine, and we'll deal with that later. We'll learn how to do that later. We're going to let this dry until next class period, and then we're going to do something special on it for later. So just go ahead and paint that area. And we'll learn the name of that one in a little bit. All right. Now we're actually going to learn how to get what's called a flat wash. Now, this is tricky. What does flat mean in art terms? This is a little bit something we'll see if you know your vocab. If not, we'll think of it in non-art terms. What does flat mean in non-art terms? What's that? I can't hear you. Straight? Maybe. How about in terms of, yeah. Smooth, yeah, smooth. So if we look at whether it's dry brush or transparent, or even this area that we painted here for our last technique that we'll need painted for tomorrow or Thursday or whatever. Okay, you can see some texture in there. There is some texture, or there's some changes of color tone. Like you see this is darker purple and this is lighter purple. You see some, I mean, relatively darker red here, and it's almost clear here, and you see it like in this one, right? So that doesn't look flat. To our eyes, it has texture. So flat means smooth. And so what we're going to try and do, and this is the trickiest one we'll probably ever do, and we probably won't have a lesson for it this year because it's so tricky, but it's flat. So we got to paint this so it has no texture the best we can, and no different changes in color from light to dark. That's called a gradient or value change. So I'm going to take my flat because this one covers the most area. I'm going to get it kind of wet with just some clean water. If you have paint in it, clean it out. You know, dab it over on your paper towel, get it all cleaned out. Okay, so I have a little bit of water on here. Not a ton, just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this square. And I can see that I've used a lot of purple already, so I have a little bit of a purplish tint to it. But that's okay. And I'm just going to prime it. Now, has anyone painted a house before? Okay, what does primer do for house painting? Okay, it will make your paint last longer. It also makes your paint go on smoother and easier. So we're priming this. When we put water down, we loosen the fibers of the paper, so it will take watercolor a little bit easier. Now, you don't want it too wet. Mine's a little wet, so I'm just going to paint it, touch it onto my paper towel. That will take the paint, or the water from the square and put it on my paper towel. Okay, and that's as easy as it can be to transfer. I just want it to be a thin coat of water. I put too much on myself. I don't know what you did. If you kept yours thin, you are better than me. Okay, and if there's little puddles, you want to just soak it up with a brush, put it down on your paper towel. All right, now I can look at it. It has a dull kind of, not a shiny sheen, but it has a dull sheen right now. And I can pick my color. What should we do? Blue. All right, let's do blue. It's close to purple. It will kind of match. I have some water in my purple. Okay. I have a good amount of blue here. And this can be transparent. This can be more solid. It doesn't matter, but what we're looking for is that there's not a lot of texture or color change or value change. And so what I'm going to do, see right here, my first attempt, as I look here, let's get this focused. I have some light area here, some dark area here. So what I got to do is moderately quickly, you know, not too crazy, is very carefully paint this area the best I can and spread that paint to the lighter areas from the darker areas. Now, once you do that, if it looks pretty good, but you have like a spot or two that's darker, okay, what you can do is, like, I have these spots here. I do the same thing that I did when I painted too much water. I soak it up with my brush. I go over to my paper towel and just put my brush on there to get rid of some of that darker area. And then once again, I just come back through here, trying to smooth out that little bit of darker area. Now, when I do this, I'm not scrubbing the paper. That's one thing as students you want to try and avoid, is scrubbing the paper, because it will damage the surface of the paper, and then the water reacts differently. In fact, the color makes it darker if you scrub into the second layer. Now remember, you just pick up some of the leftover. If you have leftover, just pick it up with your brush, get it off in the paper towel, and soak it up like a sponge, because the brush will act like a sponge in that way. And so you want to just, the best you can. Now, if I look at this and I'm being like super insanely critical, I do see, a little bit of some streaks there, but if you get anywhere near this close, I'll think you're awesome. Okay? Because this one is really tough. And it takes a long time to get pretty good at it. And like I said, this is the only time we'll probably do it this term. If you took me on a regular year, we'd have a lesson just all about this, and it's really fun. And students usually do a good job by that time, but I don't know if we'll have the time for it. Okay, so you just kind of maneuver the brush and the paint around to give it nice and even, mop up the leftover, dab it on your paintbrush, and it should look pretty flat. Now, we have the three most basic watercolor techniques. Okay, we have one more. What time do we have left in class? Okay, perfect. We'll probably get through these next two techniques, which are the next two basic ones, and then we'll leave these last three for next class period. Does that sound okay? All right. And these two, like I said, I have 4 other techniques that we can learn. You guys can pick 2 of them after I do a demonstration, and you guys get to do it on your own and see if you like it. And you get to pick which 2 you want to do. All right, for this next one, we're going to want to clean off your brush, whatever you used. I noticed that I kind of made this bigger, so I'm going to use a flat because it's bigger. But you can use a round if yours happens to be a little bit smaller. I just want a nice clean brush. My water's not clean anymore. I wish it was. Aiden, you didn't fill this up enough. I'm just... Well, that's the big thing is, like, if you want cleaner water, you fill it up near the top. The particles will float to the bottom, and then that way the top is usually a little bit cleaner. So mine's going to be purple still. It's not a big deal. I don't care that much, but when you guys start, you want nice clean water. And this time, I'm going to paint my area white, or not white, clear water. But I want a lot of water on here. Not like an insane amount, but a good amount. Now, one thing to learn about watercolors is if I pick this up, as long as I don't have an insane amount of water on here, you can see that my water is going to stay in the square. And I have it kind of tilted, and I can move the water around because there's a little bit of paint. You can see that, right? But it stays within that area. Now, the thing you have to understand about watercolor is drying time. You really have to learn to let things dry before you move on and paint an area next to a wet area. Because what will happen if I paint a color next to a wet area? Who said that? Yeah, if you say that a little bit louder. Yeah, they'll come together. They'll mix together, and that's not always what we want. In this technique, it is what we want. So what we're going to do, who has another color suggestion for us today? We've done red and blue and purple. Green. Let's do green. Okay, I have a lot of green water in here. I like to use my round brush for this technique at this point. Okay, and I'm going to load up, look at all this color on my brush. And look what happens when I put it, I can put it in the center, I can put it on the edge. Doesn't really matter where, but look what happens. Whoa, that's amazing. And that is called wet on wet. So I have a wet brush into a wet area. And I can just what's called drop in the color. And I'm not painting. I don't want to see any paint streaks or anything. All I'm doing is touching my little round brush in the one side. Now, of course, I can go back if I need to. Clean out my brush here, and if I need to add some more water because like this got a little bit too green for my taste, and I can put just regular water back in here, and it's gonna kind of spread the purple and diffuse the water a little more. Phoenix, you said diffuse? Great word, diffuse. And within reason, I can kind of manipulate things by bending the paper. And if you want it like where it's kind of has a gradient effect, you have to kind of use something to prop your paints up into, like right here, and let it dry that way. And so like if we're doing a wet on wet project in class, you're going to find there's going to be lots of times where you sit there and let it dry, and instead of just sitting doing nothing, you get to pull out the sketchbook and work on the sketchbook. So in drawing class, Aiden, I know you had my drawing class. You had lots of sketchbook work to do, and it mostly was for homework. But in this class, because of the drawing time, you do have plenty of time to work on your sketchbooks in class. You might have to finish them at home and stuff, but there should be plenty of time. Now, now that I look at this, like all the greens come down here, it's like too much. So I'm just going to let it go back to normal, and I'm just going to let it do its thing. And when it dries, it's going to make something kind of like a smoky feel or a watery feel. And I personally, to be honest with you, as I painted this, I think I probably put too much water in. So I can always soak some water out with my paper towel, which I'm going to do. And of course, when you do that, you can also make different patterns in there. Not my intended thing, but it is a thing that can happen. As you can see, some of these patterns dry patterns. But I think I'm going to put a little bit more green into this corner now that I soaked that up, and I'm just going to let it kind of do its thing. For my personal opinion, just letting the paint do its thing is the best type of wet on wet. Usually if I work it too much by spinning it around and stuff too much, it comes too flat and then just looks transparent. So that's why I just took the paper towel here. I soaked up some of the water. I think I got a little too much. And then I just reapplied some green in the corner to let it kind of fade in its own weird smoky way. And you can see this little light spot was from the paper towel, and you can get some texture in there that way. Alright, let's go over this last technique. And then what we'll probably do is get you guys some shells before we clean up. Aiden, what time do you got there?
1:32.
Okay, perfect time. We'll do one last one, and then we should be able to clean up some stuff. Alright. We'll do this last one right here. And this is actually a similar effect to this, but we're going to slightly change it. Okay? I'm going to, this is a smaller area, so I can just use my round the whole time. I'm going to load it up with some water. What color should we use next? What do you guys want to use? Give me two colors you want to use. Brown? If we're doing brown, then we should do orange then, because they mix together. So we'll get some orange here. I'm getting lots of water in there, getting lots on my brush. And I'm just going to paint some orange here. That's a little bit dark, so I'm going to mix some more water into there. In this version of wet on wet, you do want a light color and a dark color. And of course, you can even make black a light color just by adding water. Now, once again, I feel like maybe I have too much water in here. I want to kind of a moderate amount because it's a smaller area. If it was a bigger area, that'd be fine. I'm just going to pull some of that water out. Okay, that's about enough. You know, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take Aiden's suggestion and get some brown. And I'm just going to drop it along the side. You can go in the middle, you can go in a corner, you can go along the side. I'm pretty chill. It doesn't really matter. As long as I don't see like one color. Because if I see an area that's like an orangish brown and there's no like smokiness or whatever, that's the key to the wet on wet, is that kind of weird smokiness as I'm getting here in my green. You guys see that green smokiness? And sometimes I have to kind of encourage the mixture. And then let it kind of just do it. So I probably would have been better if I used yellow, now that I think about it, because I can get a really bright, intense yellow and mix in the brown, and it'd be a little bit more, because right now maybe on the video it's hard to see, but this is orange and that is brown. It might look a little bit like this original one where I did just pure water. It is different. Just keep that in mind. Alright, and what I'd like you guys to do before we start cleaning up is to make sure that you write wet on wet 1 and wet on wet 2. So 1 is with clear water, and wet on wet 2 is with 2 colors. I wish I left a little bit more orange in there, but that's the way life goes.